Okay, good evening everyone and welcome to the third event in the 2019 scholarship presentations. My name's Nigel Corr and I'm a 2014 Nuffield Scholar. We just might wait a few minutes to let a few people to come in, but just a quick rundown on tonight's webinar. We've got 4 presentations this evening. We've got Alistair Corr, Renee Anderson, Frank Miller and Ellen Litchfield presenting their study topics. Each presenter will speak for 10 minutes and we'll also have a 20-minute Q&A session at the end of the last presenter. So if you'd like to ask any questions, please just do so in the Q&A box on your webinar screen and just put which presenter you're asking the question to, or if you'd like to ask all the presenters a question, just leave it open. So we might make a start. The first presenter we have tonight is Alistair Corr, a 2019 Nuffield Scholar from Maori in central Queensland. Alistair works on a 12,000 hectare corporate cattle aggregation. Alistair's scholarship was supported by the Australian Agricultural Company, Consolidated Pastoral Company, Elders, North Australia Pastoral Company, and S. Kidman & Co. His presentation tonight is titled The Collateral Benefits of Cattle Welfare During Handling and Transport. I'll now pass you over to Alistair.
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you for that introduction. I'll just share the screen and then we'll go back to this one. So as mentioned, Nigel said, my study topic was to determine the collateral benefits of cattle welfare during handling and transport. For me, the most appropriate starting point is to thank those who supported me, to Nuffield Australia and my 5 sponsors, who Nigel just mentioned, but I'll probably mention them again just to make sure that it's consolidated. It's AA Company, the Consolidated Pastoral Company, the North Australian Pastoral Company, Sydney Kidman & Co, and Elders, who created the ways and means to make this possible. I will be forever grateful. To my employer, McTaggart Pastoral, for encouraging and backing me to take this amazing opportunity, and most importantly to my family, for the tremendous support throughout the process, and thankfully who were able to join me in some of my travels. Thanks also to the fantastic Japan GFB group for both challenging me and supporting me during our travels, and also to all the other scholars from around the world who hosted and assisted me with my travels and appointments. A little bit about us. As Nigel mentioned, I'm employed to manage beef grazing operation in central Queensland over about 12,000 hectares, and we use regenerative grazing principles of grazing and resting pasture with fewer mobs and more cattle in each mob. Also, between my wife and I and our 3 children, we also have the Corr Cattle Company, which is a small cattle trading operation on lease country nearby. To give you a better idea of where we live, these 2 maps show where we are and the production potential of this region. The numbers are a few years old, but it's a good comparison of cattle numbers between other states and regions, and I'm pretty sure we'd still be number 1. So why is this topic important? Well, as quoted, the process of handling and transport provides many opportunities for an animal's welfare to be compromised. And although this picture of possibly Africa's version of Uber Eats is inconceivable to a privileged Western culture, is it possible there are some commonalities with livestock transport outcomes if we only have 2 considerations in mind? Will this animal get to its destination? Well, more than likely, given how well it's tied down. Was the animal comfortable in this process? Well, how could it not be? It's given that it's travelling on a bed of leaves. So I set out to establish what are the measurable benefits of focusing on animal welfare during the process of handling and transport for the animals and ultimately the industry. So what are the implications? Well, firstly, we need to define animal welfare, and of the many variations, I chose the definition that encompasses 3 elements to be considered. The animal's normal biological function, as in is the animal healthy and well nourished, its emotional state, is there an absence of negative emotions such as pain and chronic fear? and its ability to express certain normal behaviours. If we focus on an animal's emotional state and its ability to express normal behaviour, the inevitable response when this is challenged is stress. Potentially, there are many challenges that can cause this to happen during our handling and transport, and the end result is physiological stress. So what are the effects of stress? Well, clinically, stress is how the animal reacts to physical, emotional, or mental stimuli that disturb its homeostasis or its desired state. Its reaction to which will result in a series of other physiological and behavioural responses to try and regain this homeostasis, the effects of which can cause suboptimal growth, suppressed milk production and immune function, and reduced rates of reproduction. As well as this, stress can influence meat pH and tenderness, which will cause a reduction in carcass and meat quality. However, there are many factors that can be influenced to manage this reaction for the animal. Alternative stock handling technique uses a method originally coined by Bud Williams in low-stress stock handling. It uses body language in a pressure release manner to convey information that the cattle respond to. It is used globally with great effect, which I witnessed in a feedlot in Brazil, but also in Australia to use animal instinct to influence their reaction, as well as other specific techniques that can enable a desired result whilst reducing the animal's fear response. Acclimation is another low-stress stock handling tool that familiarises animals with novel environments or experiences to reduce a stress response. However, the cattle industry is steeped in tradition and paradigm, and an alternative method of handling livestock challenges arguably the 8 most expensive words in agriculture. That's the way we've always done it. I had the honour of meeting Temple Grandin, who paid homage to this point by telling me that people have been more willing to purchase expensive equipment rather than learn to employ low-stress stock handling techniques, despite the clear benefits of doing so. Which is one of the reasons that Temple, who is unquestionably the most recognised name in animal welfare, identified that the biggest gain for animal welfare outcomes is to empower the least capable handlers through building facilities for the effective throughput of cattle, regardless of handling skills. Pictured here is Mark Deasing, who is the head of facility design for Temple Grandin, and he is demonstrating the curved race design, which has reportedly been implemented by more than half of the processing plants in America. Bud Williams also created a facility design named the Bud Box, which is equally effective when implemented correctly. For the greatest impact from improved animal welfare to be achieved, the consensus was that the vision must be generated from management, which creates the workplace attitude to support this. Temple Grandin acknowledged that although well-engineered facilities provide the tools that make calm, low-stress stock handling easier and safer, they do not replace management and gentle handle training. The transports phase is such an influential period, and yet, other than regular driver checks, the animals and conditions are virtually unmonitored and unrecorded, creating a potential deficit in accountability. A Canadian ag-tech startup company, Transport Genie, is developing a monitoring system that is focused on measuring microclimate conditions as animals are being transported and relays the recorded information to the driver and the base station about all of the factors that could impact on the animal's transport experience. This is still in the development phase. However, I heard from a number of international sources that foresee this tool as being a future standard. The final tool that can assist to reduce animal stress is dietary supplements with magnesium, which relaxes nerve impulses in the animal and can act as a sedative or calming influence, making them less reactive to factors that cause stress. At the Fazenda Floresta in Sao Paulo State, Brazil, magnesium is added to the ration of the tropically adapted milking cows, as seen standing in the foreground, prior to their first calving and subsequent milking, which reduces their responsiveness at a time of heightened stimulation, and then in turn allows for the hormone-induced milk letdown to occur. This was the only example internationally of the use of magnesium as a dietary additive. However, this is commercially available in Australia, and I can speak from experience in saying that it is an effective tool. So what are the industry benefits? Well, quality assurance programs, both industry and commercial, create the backbone from which the integrity of producers is demonstrated. Above this, there is an opportunity to capitalise on consumer trust and sentiment by setting high standards for animal welfare and advocating these as a product differentiation and marketing tool to achieve a premium price. The concept draws on an independent quality assurance and auditing structure that can be endorsed and or administered by non-government organisations or NGOs. The New Zealand-based company, First Light Farms, produces grass-fed Wagyu, as pictured, and as a marketing tool for their delicious meat raised right, they adopted the Certified Humane accreditation, which is an independent body endorsed by over 70 NGOs and a powerful marketing ally. But profitability is not just achieved through demonstrating standards at the retail level, but also at the production level through the reduction in productivity losses and commodity discount. So what are my recommendations? Well, the US beef industry facilitated a cattle transportation symposium in Colorado in 2015. The event was used to present information in scientific papers, as well as to collaborate and identify current and future areas of focus and research. A similar event in Australia has the potential to disseminate information by clearly and objectively demonstrating aforementioned benefits of focusing on animal welfare during handling and transport. Now, although farm profitability is the key to maintaining welfare standards, the focus of production needs to be mindful of market trends. And through continual improvements in animal welfare, consumer needs will be appeased and farm profitability increased. Thank you.
Thanks, Alistair. Great presentation, and yeah, well done. Thanks, Paul and Evan. We got your message on chat. Thanks very much, and the highlights that producers really need to be part of the full supply chain to look after their animals. Thanks, everyone, for joining. We've had a few more come in during the presentation, so welcome along to tonight's presentations. Just remember, we have got the Q&A box operational, so we will have a 20-minute Q&A session at the end of the last presentation. So now we have the second presenter tonight is Renee Anderson from Emerald in Central Queensland. Her scholarship was supported by Cotton Australia and the Cotton Research and Development Corporation. Renee is an irrigated farmer growing irrigated cotton, chickpeas and popcorn. She runs a farm with her husband and family, and her presentation tonight is titled Social License, so a social and environmental responsibility for farmers. I'll now hand you over to Renee.
Thanks very much, Nigel, and I'm going to get straight into it. My name's Renee Anderson, and I'd love to introduce you to the family farms. That includes 2 mixed cropping irrigation properties on the Fairburn irrigation scheme, right here in the Central Highlands in Central Queensland, Australia. When water is available, we have the capacity to irrigate 450 hectares of crops that include cotton, chickpeas, wheat, popcorn, and mung beans. We manage 60 hectares of native vegetation and a collaborative land care planted wildlife corridor. 40 hectares that include a permanent man-made wetland, tailwater recycling dams and irrigation infrastructure. Right here I live on one of the original homestead properties on what used to be naturally grass rangelands that graze sheep and cattle. It converted away from animal production to dryland cropping when fox numbers became difficult to control in the 60s. This farm and around 15,000 hectares of surrounding properties were converted to irrigation farms with gravity-fed supply channels in the 1970s by the Queensland State Government. I chose to study the topic of social licence due to many positive experiences in environmental management over 20 years with the Australian Cotton Industry BMP program. I also observed the challenges or roadblocks to effective adoption of environmental improvements and community engagement, especially in a world of social media where everyone has a voice. It seems I had a few hiccups there with the video not sharing, but anyway, I'll start from here. So firstly, what is social license? It's all about community trust, and it comes back to the very basics of aligning core values of public expectations and addressing their concerns about our agricultural practices. Communities are keenly focused on environmental issues alongside animal welfare. Perceptions of environmental harm, such as pesticides, runoff, and water use, represent key concerns that influence consumer spending and the pressures that communities exert on policy and regulation. In some instances, misinformation and a lack of access to credible farmer voice that recognises the challenges and shows the benefits of modern agriculture. However, a focus on communication alone is not enough. We all face environmental challenges, yet we all have similar goals. For agriculture, our goals are sustainable, ethical, and socially responsible farming systems that are profitable. I chose to look at 3 aspects that can help agricultural industries beneficially connect with their communities, both environmentally and socially: best management practices, communication, and the barriers to adoption. I have a question for everyone in the audience. Does anyone recognise this infographic? And what changes has it encouraged you to make in your lives? The United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals have been developed to ensure we work towards a sustainable future for everyone. For agriculture, they'll become one of the key drivers in practice change to manage climatic resilience and environmental management. The photo at the top right is me at the front of Rabobank in Utrecht in the Netherlands. Green financing has become one of their key risk management strategies. Banks and insurance companies have chosen a proactive route and are already collaborating with farmers globally to ensure there's safe and secure food supplies. They're working on goals to reduce agricultural waste while promoting nutrient-dense foods with reliable supply chains. So what are some of the challenges we face in agriculture today? For our farm here in Central Queensland and many farmers and graziers across Australia, an increase in climate variability and the need for a resilient system that mitigates sustainability risk to both the farm business, the environment, our employees, while minimising carbon emissions, is a key focus which can be supported by evidence-based best management practices. Increasing the transparency of our on-ground practices, backed by solid benchmarking and research data, will have the greatest positive influence on those who are sceptical of what we do. The sharing of our farm stories and information requires polite, intuitive, genuine, pragmatic discussions that are truthful, objective, reliable, and relatable to others outside of agriculture. This will require building farmer capabilities and confidence in online and interpersonal communication, and generate communities of practice where success stories and challenges can be shared and disseminated. I got to visit some fabulous examples throughout my Nuffield travels. Oh. River Garden Farms produce a wide variety of crops, including walnuts and rice, in the Sacramento Valley in California. They sat down with their employees and identified key environmental goals and risks to their farming business. River Garden Farms are part of a collaborative partnership with the University of California, Davis, California Trout, key conservation, state and federal agencies, which include ecologists, environmental scientists, and natural local resource management groups. They provide key habitat, breeding sites, shelters, and food for birds, fish, snake, and native bees, all with a sustainable focus. Research on migration patterns on birds and a timely adjustment to post-harvest flooding practices of their rice fields now benefits millions of migratory birds coming into the region. Their rice fields have become wetlands that provide both a food source of plankton and a safe habitat through targeted conservation practices. They've improved their water use efficiencies and the birds have decreased their fertiliser requirements dramatically. During my travels across 15 countries and more than 120 farms, I discovered sustainable agriculture wasn't defined or determined by the labelled farming system. I visited conventional farms, regenerative, organic, permaculture, biodynamic, and greenhousing farming operations around the world. It was an accumulation of multiple key on-ground evidence-based practices that were regionally suited alongside biodiverse systems that strengthened their farming operation. Sustainable practices are not exclusive to one farming system. Certification of best management practices clearly defines the sustainability goals to work towards, with a focus on high quality food and fibre, soil health, water quality, safe and ethical work practices. A future goal for sustainable and responsible best management practices in agriculture isn't limited to just on farm. It includes the social behaviour, responsible environmental and social norms of our key stakeholders, our leaders, our industries, our scientists, our seed and chemical companies, and our consumers. I'd like to introduce you to this slide, to this quote. Diversity is having a seat at the table, inclusion is having a voice, and belonging is having that voice be heard. I look forward to Australian agriculture having an equitable social sustainability goal to ensure every stakeholder has their voice heard. During my travels, I witnessed many barriers to the adoption of best management practices, including access to quality research and extension and the level of science literacy in some countries. Shame, stigma, and pride was also a barrier preventing people from putting their hand up to engage with others outside of their farming business. Being seen to be potentially not doing best practice meant they weren't seeking advice on constraints that could be easily fixed or managed. And one way to reduce shame and stigma is to have non-judgmental, open conversations. No topic should any longer be taboo. And research shows peer-to-peer learning from like-minded people is one of the most effective ways to engage other farmers and encourage best management practices. Historical legislation has prevented traditional farms from diversifying away from key commodities such as rice to ensure stable food supplies for their people. An example of this can be found in Japan. This causes great concern to those farmers who are actively trying to implement rotational systems for increased biodiversity and resilience. And financial incentives are not always a key driver for farmers choosing to adopt best management practices. However, when others outside of your farming business provide collaborative investment, it makes goals happen a lot quicker. Misinformation and disinformation continue to occur in many agricultural or science-related discussions, and not just from activists or consumers. Angsty conversations can happen between different farming systems, other primary industries, regions, and countries. 10 people who speak make more noise than 10,000 who are silent. It is time for us to come together to find our core common values and work on solutions. It's also important that we promptly and unequivocally respond to issues and incidents that spark industry and community concerns. And this is where adding our own voices to the discussion becomes absolutely critical. So farmers and industries, I urge you, don't let activists or others be the only voice in the conversation. Don't allow those disconnected from your farm experience be the loudest when developing policies and regulations or having online discussions. A Nuffield scholar passed on a quote to us at our conference in Iowa from Senator Elizabeth Warren. If you don't have a seat at the table, then you're probably on the menu. So be powerful and be present in sharing your story and bring evidence to the table. So where to from here? It's the people who drive agriculture. So ensure you're investing in them at every single level. Invest in research, invest in extension, and find workable collaborative partnerships across primary industries and other sectors that may benefit many. This enables us to work together towards our key environmental, social, productivity and economic goals. Provide adequate support and training to encourage and enable farmers to adopt change is absolutely vital. Best management practice programs that are effective and trusted require both industry, research and government input with regular external evaluation and validation. A clear focus to move beyond crisis management driven adoption must become a priority. And education changes lives, whether that is formal learning, informal or upskilling in your industries. Find the gaps and invest in your people. Achieving social license takes a lifelong commitment and dedication and is something that requires a group effort. So ensure you bring everyone along with you. And lastly, if you're not telling your positive farming stories, who is? To my scholarship investors, the Cotton Research Development Corporation, to Cotton Australia and to Nuffield Australia, from the bottom of my heart, I thank you for providing this once in a lifetime opportunity to learn, connect and share with others. To the Japan GFP crew, thank you for the learnings, laughter and lifelong friendships. And to my family and friends, this wouldn't have been possible without your support, encouragement and love. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Renee. Fantastic speech and presentation. Very points you've made during your presentation and very on point in today's agriculture in Australia. I'm sure there'll be a number of questions come out of it. Just on that, if you'd like to make a presentation, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and we'll do a Q&A session at after the last presenter. Okay, moving on to the third presentation this evening. It's from Frank Miller, who is from Rapid Creek in the Northern Territory. Frank is the CEO of African Mahogany Australia, where he oversees the largest plantation of its kind in the world. He also looks after a substantial fodder cropping operation as well. Frank's scholarship was supported by ANZ and the Northern Territory Government. Frank's presentation tonight is titled Adding Value and Attracting Investment in the Northern Territory Timberlands. I'll now hand you over to Frank. Can you hear me there, Frank?
Yeah, have you got me there?
Yep, loud and clear. Go for it, mate.
Okay, great. How's that? How's that, Nigel? I can't.
Just see if you can bring it up on presentation mode there, Frank.
Yeah, I just and there we go. How's that?
Yep, just see if you go to the master slide now.
Yeah.
Yep, that's it, Frank.
Great. Excellent. Well, thanks very much for the introduction, Nigel. A forester doing a Nuffield scholarship, who would have thunk it? I run an agribusiness management company charged with the management of African mahogany plantations on behalf of various investors here in the Northern Territory. For the past 5 years, though, the plantation estate in the Northern Territory has been static, and that motivated me to undertake a Nuffield Scholarship to investigate ways of adding value and attracting investment to Northern Territory timberlands. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge and thank my wife Esther and daughters Mabel and Winnie for their love and support to get through the scholarship and all the travels. My colleague Chris Oliver for manning the fort in my absence. My employer African Mahogany Australia for supporting me through this, and I hope we can certainly grow the business with some of the findings. Nuffield Australia for running such an amazing scholarship program. And of course, my investors, ANZ Bank and Northern Territory Government. And I hope that certainly we'll be able to add some more interest to the Northern Territory. I would also like to acknowledge my GFP group. They're an amazing group of people, and now what I consider as close friends. And I'm sure when they embarked on the GFP that they didn't think that they'd be speaking about so much about trees. So yeah, it was a great experience. So firstly, the objectives of my scholarship was one, to understand institutional forestry investment drivers, and to understand those will then work backwards into what is actually possible in the Northern Territory, and then look at various premium hardwood estates globally and look at their pre and post forest rate evaluating mechanisms and see what can be applied in the Northern Territory. Following my scholarship, this has resulted in bespoke chairs and meetings with federal MPs. But how did I get here? So for a bit of brief background about the Northern Territory forest industry, there's 42,000 hectares of plantations consisting of African mahogany, Indian sandalwood, black wattle and Caribbean pine, all of which are at various stages of their life cycle, some in mid-rotation, some now being harvested and various forest products being exported into international markets. But all of them have stagnated in growth. So what is the key driver and what can be done? 7 years ago, I introduced cattle into our plantations as a response to alleviating continual herbicide applications where rapid grass and weed growth was occurring in the wet season. This program has not only offset operational expenses, but brought in income through agistment, has integrated two land competing industries in red meat production and forestry, and significantly reduced fire risk in the dry season. This system has been mirrored in northern WA in sandalwood plantations where goats have been introduced. So is this system actually a viable investment and forest land use system for Northern Australia? Firstly, I attended the University of Georgia's Forestry Investment Conference in Florida to understand the decision-making process and key drivers and mechanisms of forestry investment globally. Many different aspects of forest investments were discussed, but one common theme in many presenters was the inclusion of environmental, social and governance mechanisms in forestry investments, or ESG. When considering the integrated grazing program that we have in the Northern Territory, many environmental and social aspects are met from this desire to have ESG in forestry investments. Another major concern and another major discussion point at the conference was the inclusion of forestry investments to be considered in carbon trading schemes. And this has been voiced by many investors as a key barrier to further investment in forestry in Australia. So then I went from the conference to look at real world instances where what mechanisms are being used through the growing cycle to add value to the forest estate. In Costa Rica, I visited the largest teak plantation in Central America, where improved genetics was a key part of the success of the plantation. There are many challenges in emerging economies with forestry plantations, with poor infrastructure and availability of skills to undertake management. And this has been offset through clonal forestry, where consistent trees of great form and good quality and fast growing could be produced with minimal inputs. So I thought, well, improved genetics is critical to ensuring a high performing investment. Some novel approaches were then discussed in Wisconsin, where maple syrup extraction provided income for some smaller forest growers in North America. And then in New Zealand, I met up with Glenn Chen. He's growing ginseng, a very high value crop in New Zealand. And they got me thinking about what other shade tolerant tropical species could be grown in Northern Territory in the tropics to provide passive income into a long-term investment. Then I went to South America to investigate a structured tree and beef integrated system known as silvopastoralism in Colombia. I then attended the World Congress of silvopastoralism in Paraguay, where European fund managers were presenting on the increased interest and desire to invest in these sorts of systems. The land managers, owners, and silvopastoral advisors in Colombia gave me much information and confidence that this system would be feasible in the Northern Territory. After looking at all pre-forest gate valuating mechanisms in those areas, I then started looking at post-forest gate valuating. In Michigan, log segregation was key to optimizing the value of some high value maple forests, where bird's eye maple logs were identified and individually laid out where silent auctions occurred. And this sometimes fetched up to 20 times the expected value of a log. And this is an excellent example of where logs can realize their true value rather than just being put into a large group and being devalued. In Wisconsin, a large veneer and plywood plant was visited, and the general manager was fantastic, talking about markets, challenges of supply, technology and processing. But one of the key parts that he discussed with me was people, not only his people, but the relationship that he had with the grower on the left. So this is another element that I took away of a key element in post-forest gate valuating. I then went to China, which was great because I was able to visit some of the largest timber manufacturing plants in China and discuss how innovation was being used to not only use more different types of timber, but also meet different markets. And so there I am standing in front of the Vickwood manufacturing plant, and this is plastic and timber peeled, stuck together and then sliced as veneers. In the middle is a pressurized stained panel that I discussed with a plantation manager, investment manager in Portland, Oregon. And after discussing the benefits of this technology, he said to me, you have a story, you have a great story to tell. It's a high value timber. It's offsetting illegally logged timbers in Africa. Tell your story, tell your story. On the right-hand side was fantastic. In China, there's these huge display centers of actual houses decked out with different themes. And this tells the story of how people want to live their lives and what different timbers can be used. So after all that, I came back to Australia and I decided to tell our story. So we decided to harvest some of our timber, and we had these chairs built out of our timbers. And we made sure that we had leather seats on them depicting our story, premium timber and cattle. I then set about to set up the Forest Industry Association in the Northern Territory, which at the time did not exist. And it is now an effective body to advocate for industry to have federal policy amended in relation to carbon, and also all other industry needs in relation to infrastructure and skills, education and training. So finally, what are the recommendations from my studies? Well, obviously, inclusion of NT species to participate in the Climate Solutions Fund, and it will attract new investment. We have fund managers that have now made pledges for investment, provided that this fundamental policy is changed. Increased focus on genetic improvement, and it's a no-brainer, depending on, doesn't matter what crop or animal that you're breeding, genetic improvement is integral to success. Increased market development effort to ensure highest price point. It's a premium timber, treat it that way. And continued research on existing plantation resource and integrated systems will provide good science and confidence to those investing in the Northern Territory. Thanks very much for your time, and I look forward to any questions you might have.
Thanks, Frank. Fantastic presentation, and certainly I've learnt a little more about the timber industry in Northern Territory and around the world, so well done. The last presentation this evening is Ellen Litchfield from Maori in South Australia. Ellen is a third-generation producer from northern pastoral area of South Australia. Together with her family, they run an organic production system with 5,000 cattle and 10,000 Dorper sheep. Ellen's scholarship was supported by Westpac Agribusiness. Ellen's presentation tonight is titled The Effect of Climate Change on Pastoralism in the Australian Arid and Semi-Arid Rangelands. I'll now hand you over to Ellen.
Hi, thanks, Nigel. I'll just share my screen. Great, yeah, so thank you guys for having me this evening and taking the time out of your day to come and have a listen and hear what we got up to those years ago. And just wanted to say a huge thank you to Westpac Agribusiness and Nuffield for this opportunity. It was, yeah, it's life-changing. I'm so grateful that I was able to do it. And as Nigel said, so my topic was looking at the effect of climate change on pastoralism in the Australian arid and semi-arid rangelands. Okay. So yeah, I live with my parents and husband on Wilparina Station in far north of South Australia near Lake Eyre. The photo on the left there is after some very welcome rain last year. And I just wanted to firstly say a huge thank you to my parents for looking after everything at home while I was away traveling, and it was a drought, so it was, you know, put a lot of extra pressure on everyone. And a big thank you to Blake, my husband. We got married, and then about 4 days later, I had to leave and go do my GFP, and he didn't complain at all that his honeymoon was spent racing around looking at farms. And as Nigel said, we've got cattle and sheep. Those numbers fluctuate a lot depending on our season. So Blake and I moved back to the family. My earliest memories of growing up on Wilparina were of us all wishing for rain or preparing for a dry spell. And I guess this is part of living in the desert. But climate change poses a new threat to that. So with the idea looming over our head that droughts could be more frequent or that the extremes can get even more extreme, it really posed a threat to our sustainability of living here. If you have a look at the map on the left, so you can see with the little red arrow, so we're in the center there with the extreme variability in rainfall. And in a country that's already world renowned for its boom and bust cycles, it really gives you an idea of the huge changes we see. And coupled with that, we had just moved back from living in London. We had a lot of friends going vegan to save the planet. You could see that beef is sort of starting to lose its cool factor on the menus in the new restaurants, and getting labelled a lot with being one of the main causes of climate change. So from that, I developed sort of 3 research focuses, and the first one being to try and understand the socio-economic impacts of climate change, and number 2, to gain a greater understanding of the role of ruminants in climate change, and number 3 was to identify and find other farmers that were thriving in harsh climates around the world. So we started off in 2019, and a huge thank you to my Global Focus group. We just had such an amazing time together, and they really stretched my ideas and thought processes. And not only was it a great time to be traveling because it was pre-COVID, it was a really exciting time in agriculture too. We were in China during African swine fever, Brexit, and the Common Agricultural Policy Review in the EU, and of course Trump always keeping everything interesting in America. Okay, so my first research focus was the socio-economic impacts. And I witnessed that action to slow climate change was everywhere, from China, where they have massive tree planting targets, to carbon farming in California. It cannot be ignored, and the red meat industry has to continue to stay engaged and position themselves as part of the solution and not just the problem or the victim. The second sort of thing that really shone out was that we can't take the red meat market for granted. Consumers are losing trust in livestock production, and this growing mistrust is fueling their desire for a product that they believe is more sustainable, and it often leads them to the plant-based products. The pictures down below on the left is a wet market in the Philippines, and on the right is a farmer's market in Manhattan in New York. And in the developed world, the consumers were really craving a connection with their product, and once again, to build that trust, they wanted to see photos, they wanted to be able to visit the farms, and they wanted to know that they were making a sustainable food choice. And then lastly, the impact of policy, climate change policy on production systems, perceived and real, was a huge threat and one of the biggest concerns for producers. So when interviewing producers, more stated that their greatest concern was access to natural resources and over-regulation, rather than the environmental impacts of climate change. And this highlights a bit what Renee was talking about earlier, and that is that huge importance of maintaining our social license and all working together. All right, and then secondly, I wanted to look at the ruminants' role in climate change. Comes as no surprise to everyone here that ruminants produce methane, and in intensive production systems, they also produce nitrous dioxide in the manure management, and obviously the CO2 from the energy and things like that in the intensive systems. Increasing efficiency does decrease methane emissions. So whilst the pastoral sort of extensive rangeland systems have higher methane emissions, negligible nitrous dioxide because the manure dries out so quickly, and much lower CO2 than the more intensive systems. I was lucky enough to visit the Oxford Martin School in the UK, and they're working on the equations there to make sure that when we're working out the global warming potential of different greenhouse gases, that we are, we're getting the greatest effect, because, ultimately we all want the same goal, and that's to mitigate climate change. So if you have a look at the graph, methane has a half-life of around 120 years, in contrast to carbon dioxide and nitrous dioxide that have half-lives around 1,000 years. So to get to a zero net warming with methane, if once we get to emissions are constant, then it's breaking down in the same time frame that it's being released. So you don't get the cumulative effect that we get with CO2. So it's just, I won't harp on about the graphs for too long, but these distinctions are extremely important when we're creating effective policies to decrease global warming. And it really highlights the importance that research needs to be specific to different production systems. And my third research focus was looking at farmers that were thriving in harsh climates. So we were looking to find the commonalities between all of these producers, and the three that we found was that they work in harmony with their environment, they find opportunity in adversity, and they're always working on new ventures. This photo is taken by Erica Weeder on Christoph and Erica's farm Christoph's also a Nuffield Scholar, in British Columbia and Canada. They have really extreme winters of -40, and the bison are really well adapted to that. So their metabolic rate actually decreases, so they don't lose so much weight over winter in comparison to the Angus cattle that they obviously, lose a lot of condition during the harsh winters. The bison, they don't obviously have such a secure market, but Christoph and Erica are working really hard to develop that. And that was one of the main attributes of these resilient systems, is that they're always fostering new ideas. It was never a stagnant business model. Vegeta in Kenya, and this is one of the unique things that livestock or synergistically in a natural ecosystem. So, and I think going forward, creating greater synergy between agriculture and conservation will continue to be really important. And agriculture is not just about food and fiber production. It's going to about protecting the ecosystems as well. Okay, so finally, industry recommendations. Australia, by virtue of our harsh environment, is already a global leader in climate smart agriculture, but we need to continue and work on this. So the carbon neutral by 2030, the MLA has set is a great target. And I think it's just really important that we recognise the different pathways that each unique past production system will need, and making sure we get the political support behind these things as well, like the NFF, National Farmers Federation's net zero by 2050 target. I also think, especially conservation and agriculture, is just so important. Pastoralists are really poised to capitalise on a more ecologically engaged consumer. And so I think we really need to focus on that, especially it's a huge industry in Australia, and it's unique that we have such large areas that are, relatively untapped. And as I said earlier as well, the research and policies are applicable for all of the different production systems, and also getting producers at the table of these events as well. So trying to dispel some of that concern about overregulation and giving producers a voice so that they can ensure that they feel safe and confident in the future of their enterprises. What this has meant for us back at home. So we're measuring our emissions with a company called InStep from New Zealand. We should be finished that in June, which is really exciting. We also created a product called the Sustainable Sausage. This is a vehicle to create a dialogue with our consumer, to tell our story. I think it's all producers' roles that they have to tell their story and let people know the other benefits that they're getting. It's not just about red meat, it's about all the other facets that come with being sustainable. And also looking into results-based ecosystem payments as well, such as carbon farming. Thank you very much. And I hope my internet was okay. It's always a bit rough out here.
Thank you very much, Ellen. It just hung in there. You did pretty well, actually. So we got to hear all your presentation, which is fantastic. So well done. And thanks, Ellen. Your presentation was very good. And certainly a couple of things highlighted for me that producers definitely need to be at the table, and a very common theme with Renee there that producers need a voice in Australia to represent a fantastic industry. And I have to admit, it's wonderful to see so many photos from around the world and all the travelling the presenters did tonight. There's a lot of envy there, and hopefully soon into the future we'll be able to start travelling again and hopefully do these presentations in person. So now, firstly, I'd just like to thank all the presenters for presenting tonight. We'll move on to a Q&A session. So it should go for around 20 minutes. We've got a number of questions to get through. So we should be finished hopefully by about 8:15, if that's okay. But if you do need to leave, feel free to drop off. So I've got a number of questions here. The first question, I'll go back to the start. So this one's for Alistair. In line with your discussions about magnesium, did you see any producers using electrolytes during hot periods when transporting, or is it just a bit of snake oil? Alistair.
Oh, thank you, Nigel. And yeah, thanks. That's a good question. I have looked into it and reviewed a few research articles. It seems that the common thread is that the results are inconsistent. There is claims certainly of them being effective, and even in the products available in Australia, it is effective, but it's inconclusive at this stage. Thank you. It might be playing up a little bit, so I hope.
Yeah, we got 80% of it. Thanks, Alistair. And thanks, Michael Craig, for the question. The second question's for Renee. It's from Josh Maunder. Are BMPs failing growers because not enough is being done to educate the public as what they mean? Renee?
Yep. So I don't think BMPs are failing growers, because they actually, growers are finding efficiencies, reduced inputs, and a much better whole farm management system by adopting them. And then the social license part is the second component. So being able to show those inputs and those practices through the sharing of knowledge and the sharing of your transparent practices is where the community comes along. And to date, farmers have sort of been quite nervous about sharing everything on their farm. And I mentioned that in my talk, like a lot of farmers have been very private, but I feel the more we engage and the more we share, the more open people are to listening to what it is that we do on farm and why we do it on farm. It's a really multifaceted topic, and I couldn't capture it all in the snapshot tonight, but it's certainly, there's the link between the two, and it's quite complex.
Thanks, Renee. The next question's for Frank, a question from Mark Bennett. From what you've learned, what do you make of the potential to expand plantations in the north, particularly given the potential carbon investment pools? And how do you see the competition for the capital between timber and livestock or cropping systems, or is this complementary? Could you answer that, please, Frank?
I think in the Northern Territory, it's a great question, but in the Northern Territory, property sizes are so large. There's a real shift in diversification. So what we're seeing now is a large cattle stations getting into farming and also wanting to be involved in, let's say, for example, like CPC has the CN30 initiative, or MLA has the CN30 initiative. Now that's only going to come from offsets, and those offsets are obviously available to be provided by trees. So there's that side of it. So I think that the sheer size of the properties is actually going to enhance carbon-based investment to coexist with beef production and other agribusiness in the Northern Territory. So yeah, I think there's, as I said in my answer, I think there, Mark, you can have your cake and eat it too up here.
No, thanks, Frank. And while I've got you, I'll ask you another question. This is from James Standen. Is there an opportunity to increase tree carbon capture with genetic improvement?
Absolutely. So tree with genetic improvement, we can increase productivity, and with that, there's obviously increased carbon sequestration. The real challenge will be to have a specifically recognised carbon methodology in a carbon trading system, because at the moment all tree species in Australia are bundled into one methodology, and I guess once you have enough science and enough scale, you can then be specifically what am I trying to say, quantified by your specific species. So but absolutely, genetic improvement will no doubt increase biomass production.
Thanks, Frank. We have a question for Ellen here. Ellen, to assist with handling climate change in the South Australian pastoral region, will the proposed increase in tenure proposed by the state government assist?
Hi. Yeah. Sorry. Nigel, you've turned my video off and I can't turn it back on.
Sorry. There we go.
That's all right. Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question, and I was just actually talking about that with our MP today, and I think it would be fantastic. I would love to see our tenures increase to 100 years because, well, you know, obviously, like you're aware, it increases our ability to enter into those carbon farming methodologies into the 100-year contracts. And also, I think it demonstrates that, you know, there's trust in the landholders are going to do the right thing, and, you know, that the custodians of the land. And I don't think that at the moment having a 42-year rolling lease is preventing people from doing the wrong thing. I think if you're going to do the wrong thing, you're probably going to get out quick anyway because you've wrecked your resource. And so, yeah, I really hope that aspect of the draft bill goes through, but I'm not sure how confident I am about that getting through. But yeah, I think we really need to put the trust back in the pastoralists, and, you know, obviously we still need can still have the inspections, and hopefully, you know, in this day and age, inspections shouldn't have to be done, you know, driving around the property. The imagery, satellite imagery, you know, those programs should be sufficient.
Thanks, Ellen, for that. Question for Renee again. This one's from Alan Williams. How important is to target those who have a fundamental opposition to an industry and may not be interested in revising their opinion based on facts? And how do you productively engage them if necessary? Did you get that, Renee?
Just on mute there. So this one's a very common occurrence for any of the cotton growers out there. This is something that we face daily, multiple times daily. And I guess our goal is the conversation. We're unlikely to sway someone in a conversation who's completely anti-agriculture or anti-cotton. So the conversion of their opinion isn't the end goal. We need to strive to open up those channels of communication to plant a seed, or even just focus on a conversation that builds relationships, trust building, and allows for follow-up with those people. Sorry, I'm looking at you, Nigel. You know, allows for a follow-up conversation at a later date. It's a really long-term game with people who are really distrustful of agriculture or specific crops like we see in our industry. And they don't get there overnight. It's something that's been built up over a really long time, and they won't change their mind in that first conversation. So connecting with them is really important. And even if they may never change their mind, they may change parts of the thoughts of their beliefs. And that's really, really important. And we also have to recognise that there are parts of every industry that could be a lot better. So acknowledging those issues and saying, look, I understand why you have concerns, and this is what we're doing to work towards that. We have to be really open and, you know, choose our convictions quite wisely too. But I still feel it's important that those really difficult conversations happen.
Thanks, Renee. We've still got time for more questions, so if anyone else would like to ask a question, please do it in the Q&A box. The next question is for Ellen again, from James Strandon. Can we ever get to a reasonable conversation on animal emissions without change in how they are treated in terms of emissions, i.e. move to the Oxford Martin work? Do you have a recommendation on how we as farmers can move that conversation forward constructively?
Yeah, I think we as farmers need to, you can't manage what you don't measure. It's what everyone says. So I think one of the first port of calls is that as a farm system, like any big business these days, you need to have a handle on what your emissions are, and working, where a lot of people doing a lot of positive publicity. So, there's white oak pastures in the US that is a carbon neutral. So they're also doing carbon farming with their, because of their increasing carbon in their soil with their grazing methods. And we've got Dr. Frank Mittlener coming out to talk at Beef Week. So he's really spreading a lot of this information about, the methane half-life, and also the ability of ruminants to sequester carbon. So I think, I think that agriculture is so lucky in that, we're one of the industries that we can become the solution to climate change. It's and I think that's the way that we need to be looking at it. And I think it's improving.
Thanks, Ellen. Next question's for Renee again, from Susan Mass. Following up on the common thread of social licence between presentations, the expectations from community are constantly increasing and aren't always based on science. What is the role of research and science in supporting social licence? Just on mute again there, Renee.
Sorry, I moved my screens around. I think it's really important that we remember that research isn't always perfect, and there's new discoveries all the time. And BMP is based on continuous improvement, and science is very much similar. As new information comes to hand, we adapt and we change, and it's connecting what we do on farm and using that really good solid research to back those specific practices that we do on farm. How does it support social licence? It's only one part of the social licence issue. So we firstly have to recognise that, we have to develop relationships with those our consumers, those who live in our community, and sharing what we do on farm, which is backed by science. Every day we're doing things that have been developed for us by others. That's all I've got at the moment. Sorry.
Thanks, Renee. Ellen or Alistair or Frank, would you like to make a comment on that question?
Was that do you see alignment with the SDGs input with the social license? Yeah, and based on science, is that the?
Yeah, what is the role of research and science in supporting social license?
I think it's there, but unfortunately we make our decisions based mostly emotively. And that's why I think, and also, most of us aren't going to sit down and, read a peer-reviewed scientific article in the evenings. And if you do, you probably have a firm grasp on, you don't have a social license issue. So I think it really comes down to, we say education, we need to educate the consumer, which sometimes I think is slightly arrogant to think that the consumer, can be bothered or wants to learn about our stuff. So that's why I think doing it through product is is the most efficient. So that's why I mentioned our sustainable sausage. So, you know, we're probably not going to make our millions off selling sausages, but it's a way for us to share our story with the tourists that come out to, you know, visit Lake Eyre, and they might not see a sheep or cow for a few hours driving along. So this gives them a way to recognise that, you know, we're producing a sustainable product, nutritious protein source out here, whilst maintaining their, you know, the pastoral lease for them to enjoy, and, you know, just creates that dialogue. But I think, yeah, it is very, very difficult to try and tell them a scientific answer.
Thanks, Ellen. Frank, have you got a comment on that question?
Yeah, just my opinion on that is I think that social norms are developed early, and I think that social license can be gained by like introducing food and fibre production systems more broadly into education systems, so that the future has an innate understanding of what is good management, where food and fibre comes from, and you know, and make educated decisions of their opinions based on what they've been taught at school. And at present, there's a real information gap for kids to understand where their food comes from. So I think that from the source can actually really influence how social license is, or what is right, or perception of what is right and wrong in our respective societies. So it's a bit of a left field answer to that, but I think that's at the core some of the issues that Renee would have been talking about with what people think about what we do.
Yep, thanks, Frank. You got a comment, Alistair?
Yeah, I would actually. Thank you, Nigel. And I couldn't agree more with fellow scholars there. I mean, I guess it just comes back to that old saying that there's lies, true lies, and statistics, so that you can really create your own impression of the research that you want. But creating a point of difference or a product where the consumer can see and understand, or is keen to know a bit more about it, really comes back to exactly what Ellen's talking about in her sustainable sausage. It's just creating a discussion, and I think that is that's very important to move away from a commodity to really a product of discussion. Yeah.
Okay, we've got time for one more question, and it's actually for you, Alistair, from Kelly McTavish. What would you say the biggest challenge for livestock industry has to overcome in the livestock transport?
Yes, well, it was probably, in short, it would be one of the slides I've put up. And it's just challenging producers to do things the way that they haven't always done it is probably, is probably the biggest barrier. I would have to say that the industry as a whole, comparatively to international markets, is very good. However, when I attempted to create a symposium replica, there was some barriers in that some of the discussions I had with some organising committees said that in actual fact we're having trouble getting the lowest end of the beef producers to meet decent standards rather than looking at the top end. And I don't really agree with that, but I guess that's the problem, is that we're just there's too many traditions and I guess paradigms it's just in preventing us from moving forward, I think. But essentially, I would have to say that technology will end up demanding it, and yesterday's standards are not going to be future expectations, and I think that's what will drive change.
Thanks, Alistair. And we might wrap it up there. Again, I'd like to thank all the presentations tonight. Renee, Frank, Ellen, and Alistair. Wonderful job. It's certainly given me the Nuffield buzz again, and certainly shows how wonderful and how great the Nuffield organisation is. Thank you to all the attendees who's joined in tonight from around Australia, but also from around the world. Hopefully everyone's learnt something, and take something home with them tonight. Before everyone leaves tonight, there's just a little survey for the attendees to complete to make the next webinar series better. So yeah, please take time to complete it. It'll only take 1 or 2 minutes of your time. And just a reminder that the next webinar presentations will be on next Thursday, the 4th of March. So please join in if you can for that presentation. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone and see you all later. Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much.
Bye.
Cheers. Okay.
Cheers, everyone.
Well done, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thanks. Cheers.